All right, everyone. Welcome to the first, I hope, half yearly or quarterly state of KQ streaming and production. Uh, this is hosted by KQSF today. I hope is that you all will do one of these presentations in the future. And so a lot of this is filmed from our point of view because of that. And we have a bit to say on the subject, and I know you all do too. So hopefully in the future we'll get a lot more different points of view. All right, so today I'm going to cover a couple different things. We're going to talk about the current state of the world. State of the world, of course, being um, how we set up GDC specifically. And then I'm going to split the rest of it into a couple different parts. So we're going to go over repair requirements for KQ cabs and production in general, and how they relate to production in general. We're going to go over KQ streaming and requirements there. We're going to go over Hive streaming and requirements. We've gotten a lot of questions about the Hive and how we set it up, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Finally, since all production is tied to tournament administration, we're going to go over how these relate, and then we'll talk about some future improvements and innovations we can make. All right, so let's talk about the current state of the world. So, this is a diagram I drew up a little bit ago. As you can see, it's quite a mess. Wires going all over the place. And we'll go through. It wasn't always like this. So we'll go through a little bit about how and why it became the way it is, right? But at its core, you can see the cabs each have a camera attached and lights, and they have a hive mind box built by Baltimore, Todd specifically, is Todd and Abby. The cabs, these are on top of the cab, or somewhere around the cab. Behind the cab is a streaming computer. We have a NUC back here. Blue cab is where the video output comes, and so that connects to a capture card, which goes into the streaming computer. All of these have to connect to a power source, and all of these have to get on the same network switch, which also has to connect to a power source, which is why there's so many random lines going to power. And then the streaming computer outputs to a monitor that we can drag all the way to a table. We have peripherals and a USB hub. So this part of the setup, the right side of the setup, is actually super simple. And we optimized for that when we were working on this. The streaming computer also has outputs beyond the monitor, right? And so the main one is the Hive. And again, we'll talk about that when we get there. And I wish I drew a diagram of the Hive now that I'm talking about it, but we'll discuss it when we get there. And the other thing is AV output, which a lot of venues have, and is something that you should really think about because it definitely improves the viewer experience when you're at a tournament to have the games up on TVs, and the games with scores are even better. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about repair requirements and principles. So this is the first part. The very basis of any Killer Queen tournament is obviously Killer Queen. If you don't have Killer Queen working, it's not going to work out very well. So I've broken it down into four main requirements and principles with one like caveat. So first, you have to be able to identify and diagnose problems quickly. You have to have the parts on hand to replace them when needed. You have to have the right tools to do the job, and you should be proactive rather than reactive. And When in production mode, do the minimal fix to get everything back up and running. Um, so identifying and diagnosing problems, in order to get there, you have to first know what type of cab you're on, right? So I've included in this presentation a Bumblebear presentation on different cab generations. Um, and it's actually really enlightening to look at. For us, though, I'd classify us as having three major different cab types. So there's the IPAC cabs, where there are probably three still in commission. One of them is the Detour, one of them is Logan, um, and one of them I think Ian owns currently. I'm not actually sure. So the main thing with the IPAC cabs are that they have no Rio board. Every cab is bespoke, a little wonky, and every single one of them requires shaft extenders for all the sticks. So if you don't have one of those, then you should be able to use stock parts that are listed on Bumblebear's website. Then there's Raw Thrills V1, and you can tell it's Raw Thrills V1 because there's a separate, there's a big PC inside, and the audio and HDMI are split from each other. So there'll be an audio splitter that goes into an HDMI splitter. And then lastly, there's the more recent generation of cabs, which is the Bumblebear Raw Thrills version. There, the Bumblebear presentation marks like several generations of these, but for what we're doing, we only care about the fact that there's a single splitter, there's a NUC, and it's a very specific NUC, and that's the NUC that's listed below. All right, so parts and tools. So button switches, you need a lot of these. They're the Omron D3V01 1C23. They're, I think, 50 grams. They actuate at exactly 350 in quarters. So if you put 350 on one of these buttons, they should press down. I'd say 80% of fixes are usually just you can replace the switch and wash the button with soap and water. And for every tournament, I'd have enough on hand for at least one refresh with enough spares for a second round if you need it. For sticks, it's the Semetsu LS32. They're frustrating. Sticks are very frustrating, but they're probably the most other requested fix. They're usually pretty durable in that they will fail in predictable ways, and those ways we will talk about in a second. And because they're durable and because they're finicky, I don't usually recommend trying to redo sticks when running in production mode. Splitters are another main source of failure. So if someone's complaining about frame rate drops and restarting the cab doesn't help, then you can replace the splitter inside. They're relatively cheap. You can buy a cheap Chinese knockoff that works pretty well. The more expensive versions perform a little better. Buttons are pretty durable. You shouldn't really need new buttons. I'd keep a couple on hand because buttons do degrade over time, but overall, like, if a button feels bad, it's usually some other source of problem. Usually you can clean it, and if you can't clean it, then you should check how tight the hole is that you put the button in, because you might need to loosen the pressure there. For GDC 6, I kept at least one of the NUCs on hand, just in case, because I'm paranoid, but I haven't really seen any major failures. If you're running a tournament with an IPAC machine, you should keep some IPACs on hand. We had to replace the IPACs in the Detour cab for GDC 6, but most people will not need to do that for obvious reasons. You should only need new monitors if someone screen punches, which isn't very common. And if someone does punch the screen, you're kind of screwed. So For tools, Phillips head, mini pliers are optional. Soldering kit is nice, but we have needed it, and it's really, really important to have for catastrophic reasons. And then a Dremel or wood file, and that should really be it. So I have a slide on glancing. We can talk about glancing, but you can probably just read it if you want. Basically, I don't recommend it, trying to fix sticks to try and fix glancing at the moment. It's a losing battle, and we've tried a lot, and none of the fixes are um, super reliable. I'm sure Nikki would disagree with me if he were here. Basically, just consult your cab tech to see if you would do it. Um, So the real reason, though, why I don't recommend stick fixes is because they take forever. And this goes into proactive versus reactive. So you want to front load or back load your fixes. You don't really want to be fixing during a tournament. So like during the trash games, gather as much data as you can. Pre-tournament, do a major refresh, and that should be like your baseline for what you have to do before a tournament, right? So basically, swap switches, wash buttons, make sure everything's functioning normally. If there are showstoppers, like something's glancing or an iPack needs to be fixed, like that's the time to do that. And anything else that you can think of if you have time. When you're in tournament mode, this is production time. So this is where I'd say if you can't fix it in less than 5 minutes and it's not really bad, just ignore it. The worst thing, like one of the most catastrophic things, I know the KQ community at large likes to swap cabs and put people on cabs greedily. It's hell on production, especially if you're running a Hive setup where you're trying to keep everything on a pretty strict schedule. So generally, I'd say if you can fix it in less than 5 minutes, or it's really bad, then you should do it. Otherwise, judgment call. Post tourney again, proactive time. Tournament, I'm sure there's been a lot of complaints about cab parts. Do your thing during that period of time. All right, so let's talk about streaming requirements now. So in rough order of priority, for streaming, we want to make sure that games are recorded or streamed with audio from the cab. All players can be seen on camera. Team names and game score are visible. Someone can commentate if they want to. Stats exist and are easily readable and can be attributed to each player. And player names exist, right? So basically, if you look at these requirements, you can start to see where you might say, hey, we don't have enough time to do this. You can start drawing a line and cutting off anything below the line. So games being recorded and streamed, that's really simple. All of us have done it for years at this point. So the most important thing is we have a durable record of the game and with high quality. So I have a section on capture cards if you want to read through it. Streaming is obviously preferable, but super bandwidth intensive. So you should scope out your venue to make sure you have enough bandwidth to run the number of streams you want. This is especially important because if you don't have enough up, you cannot run that many streams. D-Ray has the exact numbers. You can ask him. When we get to the question and answer, you can ask him if you need more information on that. There are a couple different streaming test tools. So Twitch stream testing before you run your stream. If you're an affiliate, make sure you run ads at prescribed break times. Otherwise, ads will randomly appear during for your non-subscribed viewers.
Also, not randomly, but if you are running an affiliate model, depending on your ad situation, there's like two options.
Mhm.
By opting for more control over your ads, you can choose to run them in between sets so that when new viewers pop in, they will not see pre-rolls before they can tune into the live game. Um, but the downside is that if you don't stay on top of those ad slots, they will just do them like more than normal a little bit.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like a lot of energy companies where you can choose like, oh, I'm gonna like pay less in off peak hours and more in peak hours. But if you end up using versus like flat fee across the board, but if you end up not really optimizing well, you end up paying more for doing the like peak off peak version. It's a similar kind of ad model that Twitch has enacted for that. So it can be really valuable if you stay on top of it for like your main stream so that new people coming in don't have any pre-rolls. Again, like ads are not the main thing, but there are other like quality advantages to like affiliate and whatnot, having different live transcoding and whatnot.
Yeah,
Yeah, just something to keep in mind.
you get dynamic bit rate if you're affiliate, right? I think that was one of the big things. Um, okay, VOD archival. Twitch retention settings are real bad. YouTube is generally the better choice for VODs. So Twitch has an export to YouTube function. But there's always the age-old uploading recordings. It isn't really that difficult, but it is time-consuming, especially if you record high-quality games. Usually, our model for KQSF is that we will stream at the highest quality available to us, but also record at super high quality. So, especially if we notice interruptions during the stream, we will re-upload those video VODs later and toss them onto YouTube. So obviously, this means you need to have a big hard drive if you want to do this model of things. All right. All
Really
right. The
quick,
next requirement.
really quick,
Oh, go
Felix.
for it.
Also worth noting that depending on your PC, it may just be much better to run your recording at the same quality as your stream, um, so that there's not a second encoding pass. I think a lot of you already know this, but unless you have a really beefy PC, having two encoding passes while you're doing things on the PC and whatnot, and running all these inputs and cameras and mics and everything, can be challenging. So, uh, being able to, especially like affiliate and whatnot, if we can have access to accounts, something that I think SLC recently brought up, like leveraging other accounts that are already at like affiliate status, for example, can be really beneficial. Is that you can run 6,000 kilobits per second streams, 1080 60, and stream and record at that with dynamic live transcoding to different bit rates for people who are watching on mobile or different connectivity situations. So you can record and stream at the same exact encoding setting. 6,000 kilobits per second, 1080p 60 is plenty for Killer Queen action. And you can do far lower than that and still have extremely high quality gameplay, even if like cameras, if you switch scenes for like full human camera stuff, will like not look as good, but the gameplay, because of its pixel art, will be really solid even at a lower bit rate. But it's really nice to do one encoding pass at a really high quality, for both recording and live. So that is one benefit, I think, of the direction of trying to leverage other like affiliate Twitch accounts, versus having separate ones, KQSF 2, 3, 4, etc. Like we've done and others have done. Just something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And like I said, D-Ray has run a ton of tests on encoding and bitrate and all of that stuff. And so if you want real good settings and what you should do them at, you should definitely talk to him. He is probably a subject matter expert on this at this point. All right. Next major requirement, I think, is that all players can be seen on camera. And this actually is a reason for a lot of our choices, especially like choice of streaming computer. Because USB bandwidth is a thing we learn. So if you want all players on the cab, you need a wide angle lens. And while there are fisheye lens mods that you can do for Logitech cameras, we settled on a specific camera model. It's called an ELP fisheye lens camera. It's like $40. You can secure them in place with app-like Velcro and just kind of leave them on the cab. They are a little finicky with Linux, specifically something to do with refresh rate, source refresh rate. I don't remember exactly the details. D-Ray has most of them. You also need a lighting source. If the camera does backlighting, that's great. Our cameras do not have backlighting. So we have external lighting sources. They're magnet mounted. So all of these cameras eat up a lot of USB bandwidth. And so if you have a small laptop, this will start to struggle because you might not have enough USB controller. And so you'll run up against bus size limits. And in particular, these ones are USB 2, so they don't get to take advantage of USB 3 bus sizes. So this is why we use NUCs in gaming laptops, because usually they have at least 2 USB controllers. And then you can start splitting your video sources across them. My general rule of thumb from years ago when I first discovered the issue was that I just started splitting up all my video sources across different USB ports, which was more of a cargo culting thing. D-Ray eventually figured out that it's on a per USB controller level, and your USB ports may all be on the same USB controller. So you have to be careful about that too. D-Ray, anything to add here?
No, I think that's a pretty good coverage of it. There are some tools to use to figure out which USB ports are mapped to different controllers. Depends on your operating system, but they're simple command line things to. And honestly, like no matter what I've looked up, you regardless of even if you have your model and everything for your PC, you kind of just have to run the commands and plug different things in and see how they actually end up mapping to be totally sure. And so labeling specific ports for specific cameras and things like that, having a consistent setup is invaluable.
Yeah. No, this is we have tried all sorts of ways to get more juice out of our cameras, to like try and put them on one USB hub, and the answer is that it's a difficult task. So it's easier to just split as much as you can. Our current cameras are on 2 separate USB ports, which might be on the same controller. And our commentator cam is on a separate controller with the peripherals. And I think the audio device as well.
One more thing on that really quickly.
Yeah.
One other thing to make sure of is that when you are running a bunch of different devices, cameras, etc., into all these USB ports, and you're using hubs and stuff like that, we found that depending on the operating system and other things, like sometimes you open OBS and input sources change. Like this camera's over there and this camera's over there, and you have to like fix all that every time. What we've realized is that if you plug everything in to like exactly where it was before you turn on the PC, then OBS responds consistently every time. So if you end up, not everyone has that issue, but I think, depending on various factors, if you're having that issue, just plug everything in before you turn on the PC.
Mhm.
It's like have your like steps, outlined for where things go in which order, and then when you press the power button. I think that's a good question in the chat. We should talk about that at the end, I think.
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, and a lot of times, in addition to having it all plugged in before you turn on the PC, having stuff plugged in before you turn on OBS, and sometimes if you plug everything in and OBS still doesn't find it, you can just restart OBS, which is hilarious.
Brian, you requested to talk. Did you want to talk right now, or you're just trying to join the stage?
Sorry, I had a question. It was already answered.
Tight.
Tight. All right, cool. So I rate team names and game score as the next big thing. As viewers, the most common question is who's winning right now and which team is which. So I'll put in a shameless Hive Mind plug here. I'm not even the creator of Hive Mind. Abby's in here. But seriously, just use it. We don't need to reinvent stats for like the 70th time or whatever it is. You can design your own overlay. Abby and Coppola are the main contributors. Talk to them. So for running HiveMind, you have a couple different options. You basically, at its core, you need a client that lives on the same local network as the cab and has internet access. The cab doesn't need internet to do this properly, but the client does, so it's easier to just connect both to the same network. So there are a couple different options. The HiveMind documentation suggests an always-on Raspberry Pi. This is sort of a set and forget option. It can become a point of failure if, for example, the Raspberry Pi fails for some reason. You'll need to set up SSH and someone who understands how that works. Or plug in a monitor to the Raspberry Pi. We have ours on we have our HiveMind client running on our streaming computer. It just becomes a part of our daily setup. It does mean the streaming computer needs to be part of the cab's LAN, right? So you just need to plug it into the network switch. Then there's the Hive setup, which we only really use when there are multiple cabs. And this is because by default, all cabs talk on the same network alias. So you need to collect the different IP addresses for the cabs. So at that point, it becomes easier to just run all of the clients on one machine. But again, that machine needs to be part of every cab's local area network. So your networking complexity goes up. And I also suggest wiring it and not Wi-Fi. Not necessarily because Wi-Fi is bad, but for our venue in specific, there seems to be several different local area networks, and it's a lot easier to just connect it to the connected via wire than to try and figure out which Wi-Fi the cab is connected to. All right. Next big requirement is that someone can commentate. So commentary can be as simple as setting up a mic. If you're in a venue with a lot of music, then you want something to filter that out. Otherwise, you will get copyright struck by YouTube. So we bought a USB audio mixer for this reason. They're not super complicated. You do need better mics at that point, though, than just a USB mic. We have Audio-Technica headsets. They were fairly cheap, I believe. I don't remember the actual price. Again, D-Ray has details if you want to know what they are. Then you can add a camera to see the commentators. This is nice. You get to see the commentators. It will increase the number of your video sources and tax your USB controller. So again, you have to figure out if you have enough USB ports to handle it. Cool. So stats, HiveMind comes with team names, so on and so forth. Player names, if you're using HiveMind, then there are multiple ways to accomplish this. So QR codes you can scan and sign in with. Web clients, the web client is also pretty easy to use. The HiveMind boxes, they're really nice when they're working. The main problem is that they add an extra level of burden when setting up cabs because of wire length, usually. So they're a little more finicky than I like right now, but they are nice when they are working, and they're usually in my P2 list when I'm setting up a cab in the morning. So, yeah. Okay, so other random technical requirements. So networking.
Hey, Felix, can I just mention one thing really quick?
Yeah, go for
it. About the HiveMind boxes. Just from BumbleBear point of view, we've been doing testing on making the game easier for newer players. One thing we noticed with the HiveMind boxes out is that it does confuse newer players a lot.
Okay.
So I would suggest if you're using those boxes to put them away when it's not like a league or tournament.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So technical requirements. So we've been talking a lot about all of these production requirements, essentially. And they all come with a cost. And the cost is generally a lot of wires. So networking, if you've been keeping track, we need 5 or 6 ports. So either you need a network switch or a very permissive Wi-Fi network. Streaming off wireless, I don't know about all y'all, but at this, it's probably a no-go. So you need a lot of wire, which means you need either a lot of a lot of network drops all over your venue, or you need a lot of network switches. And then you need a lot of appropriately length Cat6 cables. And that's actually a big part of our expenses every year is wire, network cable. Power is the other big one. And I've found you can never have enough extension cables and surge protectors. Even when I mathed it all out last year, I still brought extras and still somehow used them all. And I feel like every year I add a few more power surge protectors and power extension cords, and somehow they all still get used. So, bring as many as you can. Get everyone you know to bring a couple, and you should be all right. USB extenders. For our setup, we have roughly 1 extender per cab, and then depending on the distance between your cameras and your computer, you might need 2 or 3 more. Two-way radios are really, really nice, and we found this out last year when we were doing GDC 6. Just not having someone need to run across the bar to talk to someone to tell them to restart something or ask them the status of something is really nice. And if you haven't invested in two-way radios, you should really think about investing in two-way radios. External AV system, you should figure out if your venue has one of those. Most venues and bars do. You should definitely think about connecting to the external TV, how you want to connect to the external TVs. Finally, cabling around venue spaces is a huge and overlooked part of the tournament, and almost always you will be short a cable or two and be running around asking for it. So Always have extra cables on hand. All right, so let's talk about the Hive a bit. So the Hive setup for us was basically a command center, which allowed us to run a composite stream and also a home base for all the tournament administration staff. It was a nice little central area for everyone to just sort of check in and uh, know where to be and run the tournament, and also run an extra stream that was super cool. So a couple requirements for it. So if you are planning on running a composite stream, you need a way to receive and mix the incoming video. You need a way to record and broadcast said video, and you need a staff that's trained on it. The Hive setup.
Felix. Sorry, really quick.
Yeah, go for
Brian, you had
Mhm.
Did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I did. I just had a comment on your previous slide with the power.
Yeah.
I know that most people are running their events in arcade bars that shouldn't
Mhm.
have power issues. But if you're running it in a space that's not rated to handle lots of power, you should definitely know how much power you're getting out of each outlet. And you should also know that Killer Queen is rated for 2.5 amps to help you estimate that.
Cool.
So that's just a concern for if you're not in like an arcade bar.
That's actually good to know. We should actually write that down.
Yeah, it's there's a sticker on the back of the cab that has that info as well.
Cool.
Never thought about that. Never thought about that. Never had that feeling. Never experienced that emotion. Thanks for raising that, Brian.
That is
The only thing I saw is like the big red
terrifying.
sticker or yellow sticker on the inside of the cab, like "Don't touch this."
Don't-
Power supply.
Meanwhile, I'm laying my hand on it while I'm
Exactly.
doing. Yeah. I think Joey the cat almost had a heart attack when Ollie was doing that. Anyway, okay. So for the Hive setup, streaming computer, you need mics, you need cameras, you need an audio mixer, you need everything that a streaming computer normally has, right? We had an audio video mixer. So basically, could take a bunch of HDMI sources and then split and change scenes and so on, all in hardware. It's super cool. It's USB. Think wasn't terribly expensive. But yeah, it's super cool. You should definitely get one if you're planning on doing it. We had HDMI over Ethernet adapters because HDMI has a short range before degradation, and our cabs are all over the bar. So it's easier than running long lengths of HDMI. You do need to be careful about the range, though, because it turns out that the HDMI over Ethernet receivers that we had a max length of like 200 feet, and we were using 250-foot Ethernet cables, and we couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. So yeah, just know how long you have before the signal degrades.
Really quick,
and then yeah.
Are you moving on from this slide, Felix?
I'm going to move on in about
Here, finish
20
the slide.
seconds or so.
Finish this.
Yeah.
Finish the slide. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, tournament command center computer is the last thing. All right. Do you right?
Yeah. So I think there are a number of things to talk about with regard to the Hive setup. There's alternate approaches like NDI, which are incredibly interesting, and I expect that we can have pretty prolonged conversation about that. But specific to this approach to the Hive setup, I thought maybe just like 1 or 2 minutes on any questions specifically related to this particular configuration on the Hive setup. I would just elaborate that the audio video mixer is essentially a capture card that takes in the one that we had 4 HDMI signals, which we ran again over Ethernet cables. It's capturing all 4 in real time, so it gets very hot. It's different than a USB switcher, which will tell the sending computers that they have an external display or not, which makes sending from OBS, a full screen feed to an external display ephemeral. As soon as you switch the input essentially on the other, or the output rather, on the mixer with a USB hub, then the sender PC will no longer see an external display, and that made it problematic for USB hubs or switchers. So the video mixer was a way to have actively, perpetually, to all of the sender PCs, they saw an external display, and we were able to live switch between them. Any just quick questions on that setup? Again, we can go into more detail on it and other solutions like NDI at the end of the call. But yeah, any initial thoughts on that? Reading the chat here, I think maybe we'll just get into the chat stuff later, unless you want to raise it now.
We can, if there's nothing pressing, we can finish up the presentation and answer questions.
Let's do that. Thanks, Felix.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So miscellaneous tournament requirements, bracketing software. So Challenge is our de facto case. It ties into HiveMind. We have used Smash.gg a number of times. It has some interesting use cases, but they were pretty difficult to manage. And we did have to have staff at one point to help us. So, yeah, Challenge is more lightweight, in my opinion. And I think it's probably the better choice. And we all use it. So, tournament admin software, HiveMind has that built in. We might need some tweaking now that the tournament brackets can all be on a single page for Challenge, and make sure you train on it. There is a non-trivial learning curve, which we found during GDC 6 when I had to try and train people on it. Yeah, so if you're planning on using it, just make sure everyone on your team, on your staff, knows how to use it, or everyone who's supposed to be on your staff doing match management knows how to use it. I included a parts list in here. It's the parts list that we used for GDC 6 last year. It's a very useful template just to keep track of what each station, each cab, and each streaming setup will have. We tried to keep all of our setups pretty uniform, but as you'll see, if you take a look at it, even when that happens, it is still, every setup is still unique and bespoke in its own way. So yeah, future improvements, ideas big and small, can drastically improve the viewer experience when you're watching a tournament on Twitch. So the recent big one for us was the Hive, but then one of the smaller but really, really impactful ones was just adding lighting for our cameras, because we were always wondering, why are our cameras so dark? And Toshi was just like, why don't we add some lights? And all of a sudden it was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that was huge. So, ideas and improvements can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to come from just tournament organizers or just staff. It can come from the players themselves. It can come from outside viewers. And I just encourage you all to think about improvements that you can make. And for example, one problem I'm trying to solve is glare, because that seems to be a major complaint at every tournament, and we always forget about it until we get there. I was thinking a little curtain rod with blackout blinds, and you could just sort of step into the cab booth, but we'll probably have to workshop that a bit. Yeah, and that's basically it. So any questions?
So we have a number of questions from the beginning of the presentation.
All right.
It's good we have a record here. Let me scroll up and see if we can go somewhat in order here, and people just let me know if it's essentially been answered or is no longer relevant. So we have. All right. So the first one I think it would be good to touch on is lubricating oil on springs for buttons. That's a first for me. There are myriad lubricants for all kinds of purposes. I'm not familiar with Protecta, the brand, but Jason, do you have any sense of like the fundamental type of lubricant that is and the purpose here? You mentioned something about preserving the springs. Is there the corrosion worries? Is that the main concern? I'm guessing it's like a light oil just for corrosion.
He's posting in the chat saying that they don't do that anymore.
Oh,
Okay.
sad.
All right, cool. Well, good resolution on that. Next we have, what is it about the Hive setup that makes swapping games between cabs problematic? I clarified that in the chat. The Hive setup is not really hampered by switching cabs dynamically in the tournament. It's more TOing and marketing, communicating to the schedules and cab assignments to viewers and whatnot, and managing that from a TO perspective that makes that challenging. So that was a good question and an important, I think, clarification.
Yeah.
Um,
Alpha lockback, Velcro. Yeah. Whoops.
Yep. Some good thoughts around Hive Mind, potential enhancements.
Do you put everything together on one large LAN or segment them? I have so at GDC, technically it was all one large LAN, right? Like it all eventually went back into the wall, which all connects to a single router somewhere. Each setup had its own little LAN setup. So I needed to but I did need the address of every individual cab. So you could not just call kq.local.
So kind of on that, when you're asking about having everything and getting the IP addresses and stuff like that and using, I mean, you said into the wall, so I assume that you're using the bars network stuff there.
Yep.
Or are you bringing all of your own equipment on the networking side?
Yeah. So we're using the venue's internet, in our case, the bars. All of the network switches were ours, so we brought all of that stuff. All of the wires were ours. The BB3, we did successfully run streams off of hotspots, actually, which was really cool.
That's scary.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I don't think we had stats on one of them because of that hotspot issue.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
we did not. I don't recall it entirely about stats. We also ran out of gigabytes, which we had to buy more gigabytes. So that was important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when that happens, they don't you can't do it ahead of time. They won't let you do it until you run out, and then you just have to call them.
Yeah. So not recommended. But it is possible.
So were you using your own like modem for?
No, we were using
stuff.
we were just using the venues stuff.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then just your own routers.
Yeah.
Switches.
Yeah,
Not even
they
routers.
are.
So the switches
Okay,
are
yeah.
the switches are cheap.
Just
so
switches.
From my
Just switches.
perspective, that
Gotcha.
the thing, I think it's important to think about tiers of production that you want to be able to support, and you need to be. I think going into an event where you're shooting for super high quality, like shoot for the moon, and then as you get close to the event, be aware, it's likely that you're going to need to like scale a tier back. That's what happened
Yeah.
with GDC5, where we wanted to do the Hive setup for GDC5. We like done a lot of testing and planned a bunch of stuff for the Hive setup for GDC5. It got a month out, and then we cut that out. But the rest of it then was like pretty solid, and we still had our issues. But it's nice to have these different tiers of functionality that you want to support.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, like if you can't stream, that's okay, but make it so that when you can't stream because the internet goes down, that everything else, like what's your next tier of your production? It is stats still work, cams still work, commentary still works, and you're recording at the same quality that you would have had otherwise, and then you can upload those pretty quickly, hopefully, right? And all it is that you can't push that stuff to the internet in real time. That's really great to be able to just say that we're going to cut that one part out, the live sending of that information. Obviously you need some sort of internet connection to have stats working properly, because you need a connection to HiveMind, but you can run that off of a cell phone. The Detours Wi-Fi was down for like 2 weeks, a couple weeks ago, and we actually, basically we did network sharing, internet sharing from like between our streaming PC to our cab, and just ran off of a hotspot, like a phone. There was like literally my phone, which has very limited data, and we were able to get stats working from that and record at whatever quality we wanted, and then we still had, it wasn't live streamed, but we still had every other aspect of our production that we wanted. It was a league night. It didn't matter all that much, but it was a really interesting case study. The first week, I didn't quite get it working, but the second week, the internet was still down. We got that working. And so I think going into events with that mentality of like, will your infrastructure work when you just take certain components out of it? I think it's really important. So with just having a bunch of network switches and all of your cabs connected and your streaming PCs connected, where you can have stats working and even connecting to HiveMind for the stats purposes on like low bandwidth from a hotspot or a phone even, right? That's not a lot of data to send. Having that tested and reliable so that even when if overall the internet goes down for your configuration, it's not hard to like make sure that it's set up that way. And it can mean that you have still, at the end of the day, really high quality recordings with full stats and everything. And it's quite satisfying to be resilient in that way.
Yeah, one of the things that this does bring up that one of the things that we probably should get better at as like an org as a whole is the idea of graceful degradation. So, like D-Ray said, so you run out of internet, like your venue's internet is down. What do you do? And how does your setup work still? Right. I wouldn't count. I know that stats could probably be run off of dial-up, like Abby was saying, but there is still the fact that you do need internet for some parts of it. So I was talking to Chris, and he was saying that there's a possibility that we can get HiveMind running completely locally. So that's a possibility. But yeah, just if you like looking at our setup, there are definitely points of failure, and mitigating points of failure is probably a good next step for anybody who wants to do it, essentially.
I just wanted to mention, if you are looking for hotspots, definitely shop around. I remember I got a hotspot for the SF retreat a couple years ago because we needed better internet. And through Verizon, they had some really good like 1 month free trial, super big, like a large amount of bandwidth for the first month, like at like very low or no cost. So you could probably find a good deal if you're shopping around. And I had to go to the Verizon store to kind of get that deal, I think. So like you might actually want to go to physical like Verizon or AT&T stores to research that for your local event.
Yeah, it's tricky though, because it's like, okay, if your kind of free quote unquote internet goes down, then you're gonna get a hotspot to stream or to have stats working. It's like, if you're gonna stream, okay, you're probably gonna drop your stream bit rate, right? But then are you running PCs that can do dual transcoding, parallel transcoding in a lower bit rate for streaming and a higher bit rate for recording? Or can they only do one pass? And if they can only do one pass, maybe you just prefer that you have a higher quality recording and then you upload it later, you know? So it's, because we have these mini PCs that are really cost effective. They run, you know, Linux, and you know, our thing is like, if the internet is not working, we're just going to record, but it's going to be still at super high quality, right? Or as best as the machine can provide, 1080p 30 or 1080p 60, and we can lower the bit rate a lot, you know, potentially, but fundamentally, that's more important than streaming every single cab at the same time. So, you know, it's a, got to make those kinds of calls of like what different tiers of production do you want to like fall back to, as far as the progressive degradation that Felix mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think it's different for every scene, every venue, and whatnot. But I think going into an event, that's an important thing to think about. What's your like contingency plan?
Yeah. Yeah, and we actually had several documents that we wrote out that had the golden path plan, and then several hours of what if statements at the end of it, being like, what if this happens? Okay, do this, so on and so forth, right? One thing we should touch on, right? And this goes to D-Ray's earlier point, where it's like, you know, we had GDC 5 and we had, you know, these grand plans for the Hive, right? And we didn't get to implement them during GDC 5 because there was a lot. We had a lot of stuff that we hadn't done before, or not even hadn't done before, but hadn't done in years, rather, because it was the first major tournament after our first major tournament after the pandemic. So for the scenes out there who are newer, who haven't run a major tournament before, or have run a major tournament but have like all new staff, it's important to know like what your staff and what people are sort of capable of, right? And not to overtax those people, because that's the quickest way to burn out your staff and burn out the people running the tournament, and make it so that they don't want to run it again next year. So, you know, just have the capabilities in mind. Know when something is too ambitious versus ambitious but doable. And always know that you're building something that can be built, you can build on top of next year, right? So like, we didn't get the Hive at GDC 5, but by the next year we realized we could do it because we practiced with GDC 6. Or sorry, with GDC 5 for GDC 6.
Quick aside, we have a few people in the audience. If you want to voice a question, feel free to do it in the chat or raise your hand, and then I'll add you, and you can talk with voice. For the next thing, I was curious to hear a bit, Brian, Lee, or others, about the SCI cabling at 35 and has been used or is going to be used elsewhere. Yeah, could anyone speak to that?
I can probably speak to it, but before I do, I'm curious, Brian, when did Nick tell you that?
It was really early on. Like I don't think it was.
Okay.
I don't think it was committed to anything. It was just like we were just talking shop about a bunch of things, and
Yeah.
I understand that it's just for very long distances.
Yeah, so it's SDI. SDI is
That was it. Yeah.
we were talking about, and it's still not. We're still not sure exactly what that's going to be. I'm hopefully going to get Nick in a room at some point this week so we can figure that out. But I think we're leaning right now toward Cat5 or HDMI over Cat5 or Cat6. That's significantly more affordable than SDI, and of course at the expense of the runs. But we have to do some measuring. But Logan Arcade is maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 feet from front to back. So it should be doable, but like moving up and down walls takes up a lot of feet. So yeah, I don't have a solid answer on that yet, because
So-
the bar is also is looking into investing in that sort of wiring technology, because they stream a lot of pinball and stuff. So that's complicating things because we can't just do it ourselves.
Totally.
So
Go ahead, Ben.
I use a lot of SDI stuff at work, and for running just basic cameras, and they're analog signals, and so over long runs you can run into problems with analog signals. You'll just get like fuzziness or flickering and stuff like that. So I would probably not do it for what we're talking about, but
So it actually
it might work
converts
fine.
the HDMI to an analog signal and then back.
Yeah, I mean SDI is analog.
Interesting.
I mean, it might like encode it in a cool way in order to make it so that you have less signal loss kind of stuff, but by
Yeah.
default, that's what it is.
Yeah, so I don't know if we want to talk about this, but the other option that we're considering is NDI.
So I've looked into a lot of the NDI stuff, did some tests, seems awesome. So I'm gonna try I have HDMI over Ethernet as backup, but for Spiral Lake in a couple of weeks, I'm gonna initially try to set it up with NDI to see if that all works out right, and then panic fall back to the known working.
I remember. Sorry, go ahead.
And I was just going to ask, what is there any specific insights that you came to while researching NDI? One that I ran into is that whatever computer you're using should be pretty powerful, because it's just another stream that computer has to send out. If you're sending the Twitch, you're
other
NDI, and then you're possibly also recording. It's a lot of
I mean it's a whole nother output, right? So it definitely is a bit taxing, but not too terrible. I mean, they have like NDI clients for your phone. You can run that stuff from your phone just fine. It's not the worst. I mean, I was running it on my MacBook Air with all of the cameras and everything like that, and it was all working fine. But one thing that I did find that is kind of weird and interesting is that when I was doing it over Wi-Fi, sometimes it had a really hard time picking up the different computers, but it seemed to not have that problem as much when I was running it wired. So just making sure that your computers are all discoverable to each other on the same network properly might be a problem. And so that's why I got all the Cat5 HDMI as fallback, in case for whatever reason one computer doesn't want to show up on the local network.
How was the latency in your testing?
Super great. I mean, like, I don't want to play the game over it, but it definitely was. I mean, it was much faster than like watching it on Twitch or something like that. So it was pretty good.
And
Like, I would say
it depends on the network itself. As we did a test with NDI the other day, in the same room, like from 15 feet away over Wi-Fi, and it was pretty slow. But I don't know I don't know what the details of that location. It was a different location than we're usually at.
Yeah.
And it ended up being that when streaming Twitch from my laptop was producing a better result than
Interesting.
the streaming laptop sending NDI to me. But the reason I brought up the having a good computer is because like the streaming laptop that we use most of the time, it's a good computer for 6 years ago or something. So it's kind of on its last leg, and I think it just has trouble putting that out.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. It's not just another video output going HDMI over Ethernet via Cat 5e or Cat 6 is you're offloading the work to the little boxes that convert from the HDMI to Ethernet.
Yeah.
And it's just another display for your computer. Like that's the load. It's for NDI, you're actually doing video like compression, right? You're doing some kind of encoding pass.
You're encoding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is another encoding pass. And for us, I know most other people are using like laptops and a lot of gaming laptops and stuff like that and trying to like source who can bring a laptop here or there to this tournament or that tournament, and like people show up and you're trying to like plug things in and we've been really trying to push for get really, really cheap mini PCs that live in the cab kind of permanently, and that run Ubuntu and just like our set, the ports, everything, it's like consistent. Try to find some sort of relatively consistent, not too expensive option that's stable. And I think for us, it's like dual pass encoding is just like a non-starter. It's like if we can't stream, we're just going to record kind of thing. Because if we can't stream at a high quality, right? Like on a hotspot, we're not going to record at 1,000 kilobits. We'd rather just record than record and stream at that. So I think that the performance stuff is, it just depends on like where I think where your hardware is and what your value, what your values are as far as the production stuff. And those things are intertwined based on the resources I think that each scene has. I'm definitely curious to explore NDI solutions, but my main worry is the like performance stuff as far as how our general setups are configured.
I'm also
really quick. One last thing, Brian. Ben, on the topic of like tiers of production things, like I think it's absolutely dope that Salt Lake is trying to pioneer this new path, and I absolutely wish for the best and hope it works out, and then we can adopt it more widely. But definitely having what's the next tier like already tested and planned like a month in advance or whatever of like Salt Lake so that you're ready to go.
I didn't want to
it sounds like you're already
long,
kind of there, but just one more plug, that's
Yeah,
how GC5
I do.
went.
Yeah, I do like that every scene like just wants to push the envelope a little farther, and that's why I hope that we can have another one of these in a couple months and someone else does the presentation.
The one thing I wanted to mention is because I floated this idea by Nick to just have the Killer Queen machines output game the footage to NDI, so you wouldn't even need a capture card. Just like natively from the cab PC. And he did a bunch of testing. The PC may have not been powerful enough, but I think another thing that was identified as a limitation of NDI is that it does take up a lot of bandwidth, even just on the local network, and that it's probably fine for one or two cab feeds, but we were unsure that it would continue to have that same steady feed if you're going to have a lot. So if you're going to test out NDI, I would also try to test out however many feeds you're trying to put on NDI. Like, don't just test one and be like, all right, this works. I would, use the full I would test the full capacity of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, we're gonna have 3 cabs, so we're gonna try taking all of
Yeah.
just the OBS outputs and throw them into NDI, see what happens. I imagine it would be probably pretty problematic if you were trying to do, Bubble Bash and you have 10 cabs. Like that's a ton of network data to be streaming video through. So I definitely see that as
Yeah, I think
there
three
is an
three
upper
could be
limit.
fine. Yeah, I think
there is
3
an
could be
upper
fine.
limit.
You would just have to network those separately, wouldn't you? In that case,
Yeah, you would want them all. You'd want to group them onto switches appropriately and stuff like that in order to make it so that you're not trying to push, 10 streams through 1 gigabit connection. You'd probably want to cluster them up into groups of 3 or so.
or increase the switch capacity because they have
Yeah,
Ter-
or do a 10 gigabit switch, and who cares?
I think they're affordable now, so it might be worth it.
Yeah, maybe.
I
One of
remember-
the biggest benefits of NDI is that it eliminates the limitation of the capture card. So if you have a Hive setup and you have 4 cabs streaming and they're all sending NDI to the Hive computer, the Hive computer has access to all of those video feeds at any time. So you could do whatever you want with them in terms of production.
Yeah, that's somewhat our plan, is to have a different scene for each one of the different cabs so that the commentators can just swap between the scenes. And, you're not having to decode all of them at the same time because you only have so many active at any moment.
Well,
At least that's the hope.
Well, am I unmuted? Well, but the thing is, like, our setup, it's like you have to decode either hardware or software. So our setup is that there is a video mixer that takes in 4 HDMI inputs. They happened.
Yeah, the mixer
like,
definitely changes the way that it works. That's kind of what I was asking before of the mixer versus having, instead of, 4 going into the mixer, having 4 capture cards go in as sources
right
into the Hive's OBS. Is
Right. There's like
limitations there?
There's like 4 options, right? There's the most trivial one is you have an HDMI hub or switcher, right? That's what we first tried, and then you have the HDMI hub switcher going into a single capture card into the Hive, right? It's like the lightest weight. The problem was that whenever you switched input, the source PC would like
cab
lose that as a display, and then you'd have to like full screen display to that display once it's active, and it just like wouldn't work, right? So what we landed on was the second option, which is a video mixer where you have you're constantly reading 4 HDMI inputs, again happen to be going over Ethernet cables, Cat5e 6, and so the sender PCs all perceive a perpetually available, second, third, in our case, third display available, and so that's fine. You set it once and forget it. Then you have the third option, which is NDI, where you have encoding on the sender side, which is more CPU load there, and then decoding on the receiver side. Now you have 4 decodes on your central Hive PC. That's a lot more load now you need on.
I mean, you only have 4 decodes if you're pulling all of them in at the same time, though.
Right. So good. Yeah. Right. So if you're only displaying one at a time instead of recomposing, then sure you can do that. And then there's like the fourth option, which is like the live decode essentially of all 4, where you have a 4-way capture card like the Camlink Pro, where you have a tower PC and you have the Camlink Pro over PCIe and it has 4 inputs, for example, right? And it's like it's a 4-way capture card where you could actually do a 2x2, if you wanted
like
to at the
700
Hive.
bucks.
Both of those 2 latter options to me require like increasingly more like power at the Hive, which is fine. If you're gonna like have a 5th PC in a 4-cab setup, like throw all the money at that. I mean, we were running off my MacBook Pro with like M1 Pro Max, whatever chip, and is like overkill for what we were doing, and probably could have run a lot of the things like those other two options. And I think that that's reasonable if you have like cheaper options at the nodes, and then like really invest in the Hive setup. Yeah, but there's like a bunch of different ways to do it, and like trade-offs. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like having commentators switch in OBS scenes, or mapping those to like keys, or then having a Steam or a Stream Deck, for easy buttons for them to switch. You can do all that, but also like the HDMI switcher just has 4 mega pad buttons that are like lit up and blinking red for the active one, and they just press that, and there's no kind of software. It's just like all self-included. So it's kind of, I don't know. There's the different approaches, and people seem to really like the mixer in particular. I think having it's like a 2-inch LCD display that's not super valuable, but the nice thing about the video mixer is that it not only is a USB capture card essentially for the 4-way input, but it also has an HDMI out where you can see the 2x2 of all of the things, and the active input, as well as the volume levels for all 4 inputs. So you can tell, this cab, and we saw this many times during GDC6, this stream is like not sending audio right now. So we're not going to switch to that. We're not going to switch to cab 3 until we go figure out why it's not sending cab audio or commentator audio. Or we weren't sending commentator audio because we were commentating at the Hive, but like it's not sending game audio cab 3. So we're not going to switch to cab 3 until we go fix that. And like there were many times throughout GDC 6 where we noticed that because we needed to restart this or that, and then it wasn't sending the game audio, and then we would go fix that before we would ever at the Hive switch to that. Having that separate monitor with the 2x2 and all those diagnostics, like all built into a little box that's like $150, was like really nice as compared to, I think, the other options, I would say. But NDI, the upside, like that direction seems fantastic, and there's just like way more upside to that approach. So I'm incredibly keen to see what we can do with that direction, and would love to hear your findings, Ben, and any others who explore this.
On that, I mean, if you're planning to have the HDMI over Ethernet as a backup, it would probably just make sense to set up the whole entire HDMI Ethernet network by default, and then also run NDI on top of that. So you could have your video switcher with all 4 while also having NDI. So if NDI stops working for whatever reason, then you have your backup immediately there, because you're not going to be able to rewire at the event, in the event that it goes down. You have to have both systems set up.
So there's a nuance here that like HDMI over Ethernet is or HDMI like over Cat5e6 is different than HDMI over like IP.
Right.
And I got really tripped up on that. I don't know if are you familiar with the difference there, like converting it to like packets, like IP packets versus the just sending the signal as is over different wires.
Yeah, I mean roughly.
Fundamentally, yeah. I mean, I don't know a ton about it, but I know that they're different. They're fundamentally different. And I think for what you're talking about, where you wouldn't have to actually like touch anything, you would need to do HDMI over IP, which you can run very far distances, through network switches and all kinds of stuff. For what we were doing is just HDMI over Cat5e6, which is like point to point. You can't run that through a switch.
Right, you have to have the individual decoder boxes in their own
Exactly.
lines, right?
Yeah. So I mean, that's something we've never tried is like HDMI over IP itself. That you could maybe like have as a backup for NDI. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that essentially what NDI is at that point?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's what it's acting like.
It's like a specific standard on that protocol.
It's a specific protocol for it. It's a standard. A big reason why I have all of the additional stuff as fallbacks is because I got a bunch of like enterprise grade networking equipment, multiple APs, and I'm gonna try and set everything up wireless beforehand, and then run it all through our own router and everything like that, so that I have access and full management to all of the different IP addresses, set static IPs, all that kind of stuff. Because our Hive setup is going to be on the second story of the bar. And in order to make those network runs, I either have to go up a story over a railing and kind of be in the middle of a bunch of stuff, or make very long runs upstairs and through the corners of walls. So that's a big reason why I started to investigate into the NDI stuff, because if we could cut out the need to hardwire some of the things, it would save a substantial amount of headache, just because the bar is set up to be 2 stories and all the cabs are going to be on the main floor, and then there's no room down there after that to put any of the streaming. So the Hive has to be upstairs.
So you're not only running NDI, but you're running NDI over Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Hmm. Have you?
That's the attempt. That's the attempt. That's why we're setting it up.
Yeah.
Like, well beforehand.
Are you going to be able to test it when there's, hundreds of people in the bar? Because one concern that I have with Wi-Fi is everyone's carrying a Wi-Fi device in their pocket, and interference is down.
I mean, that's again the nice thing about the way that the stuff is set up is I have full management over the network, so I can change channels and everything like that.
He's just
right?
going to start booting people off the network.
Yeah, I get to kick people off. So it should be good. I mean, each of the APs are rated for like 600 clients each, and I have 2 of them. So, in the couple hundred square feet that the bar is, we should be able to have like 5 times the bar's capacity, technically. So
I don't know. I heard your event's pretty hype.
I'm
sad I can't make it. The wedding. Yeah, and there's like 2,000 players coming from all over.
I hope not 2,000 people. None of us want to do that. So yeah, that's my current thought process through the whole thing is try and set it up wireless. The nice thing about that is all the wireless stuff should be able to try fast, fail fast, because it's the least amount of physical setup. And we can do that while we move cabs in and stuff like that. And then, worst case scenario is I do what everybody already does and run lots of cable runs. And I know how to crimp cables and stuff like that. I'll just go buy a box of Cat 5 or whatever.
I still have a box if you want it. Like I have 1,000 feet of cable that thought
I'm pretty sure I
crimp.
have like 800 feet still left in my basement. So
oh, this is our lives.
Yeah. So I'll definitely bring all of that stuff as backup, but I just want to try it. I have the time freedom to throw it at the wall and see what sticks, and then report back and let everybody know how much of a headache that ended up being for me.
Hey, hopefully it runs really smoothly so that we can take it for for GDC 7.
Yeah, that's why I was asking if you guys were using like how much of the bar's network stuff you were using, because we plan on using it basically only for the internet access, and everything else is managed on our side.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, it seems less likely to be problematic. I mean, I've been in our bar's networking closets, and I don't want to touch it.
So Ben, two questions.
Talk a little.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to ask if you could maybe talk about how you set up that network so it's isolated aside from the one connection to the internet from the bar.
Yeah, I mean, the entire thing just runs on its own VLAN, on its own router with its own APs and everything like that. So it just sees itself as its own. I just plug the bars from the bars network switch into the LAN port for the network access on our router.
Okay, so you just
And
bring.
then,
So it's a normal LAN setup. You just. Okay, I get it.
yeah.
And
I'm double natting it is what.
And
So
that doesn't create a bot. I don't know that much about networking, but that doesn't create a bottleneck. That one cable out from the bar, it can.
I mean,
handle.
we have the one cable out from the bar, but that's going to be where we're at. We're going to have a gigabit up. So,
Oh wow.
Jesus.
we're doing our 5 streams through that because everything else happens on the local network of all of the encoding, decoding, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I think minimum we have a gig up. We might have 2.5 up. So,
My God.
gotta love fiber infrastructure in Salt Lake.
Yeah. I think we
I mean-
had 10 up.
No. We had. I'll take a brief aside to talk about what we were working with for GDC 5 and 6. We had 20 up is what we were measuring. I don't know what was supposed to be rated, but we had 20 up, which means we assumed half that essentially. And we wanted the Hive stream to be super high quality on our affiliate Twitch account, which we can max out at 6,000 kilobits per second, 1080p 60. So that's what we ran there. That left, I think we ended up stretching it to like 12,000 or 1,200 megabits per second out of the 20 that we were working with. So we did 1,500 on the 4 PCs streaming. So that was 6, and then we had 6 for 4 streams. Then we had 6 just for the Hive, and it may seem like 1,500 per stream is insane, but we are running them 1080 30 and sending the real-time display to the Hive at 1080 60, so anything that was in the Hive was getting recorded and streamed at 1080 60. 1,500 at 1080 seems psycho, but in the testing that we did, unless you are switching to scenes where you're having like humans, in camera doing stuff where it looks absolutely terrible, or it's the like attract reel where it looks absolutely abysmal and you get crazy, striping and pixelation. Actually, for the game itself, because it's pixel art and it's like doubled, turns out and like the 95% of the screen doesn't change frame to frame. You actually can run really high quality Killer Queen streams at 1080 30 at 1,500 kilobits per second.
Yeah,
and
most of the stuff is static
for
most of the time.
Yeah, it looks better
doesn't
than
matter
720, even 60. So like you got to just run the test and eyeball check it. Like fundamentally, you just have to do that. And I have a bunch of sample files I wanted to like upload, and I have a bunch of them from my garage. Like this, the kind of stuff I was doing. I was not getting good at the game. I was just like testing just string encoding passes and settings, especially on like these starved Linux boxes. But I was talking to Abdu about this at what was the Portland tournament late last year when they were dealing with starved network traffic, and I was like, just drop it to 1,500 and like up the pixels, and it'll be fine. Other than the attract reel, which will look like shit.
The next thing is we got to get off bars networks and start using Starlink or something.
We used Starlink at our retreat last year in the summer.
Yeah, it actually worked all right. It wasn't too bad.
Yeah, it would go out for 10 minutes at a time because
that was the main problem.
Thanks, Elon.
To answer question of which routers, I'm using all. Jeff was right, using all Ubiquiti stuff. So I have all Ubiquiti stuff at home. So, and they're local in Utah, so I can get stuff ordered and delivered next day. So it's nice and easy. But it does mean that I have like basically a network rack of equipment that I take with. So pros and cons. I'm with you, Jeff, though. I think 720/60 for KQ is probably more advantageous than 1080/30. It's a pixel game.
Yeah, I think we ran into an issue where the other day on stream there looked like something that was very clearly not a kill. And we think the kill happened in the drop frame. Any other questions before we close out?
All right, I had to step away for a second, but I had a question about the USB bus stuff. Because I don't know the difference between like USB 2 and USB 3. Like, is it better to have USB 3 webcams? Is first question. Second question is, if you're trying to figure out how many USB controllers you have on your computer. I know D-Ray talked about this for a little bit, but is there a way to like look that up beforehand on like specs for a computer if you're trying to figure out if your PC or laptop hardware has that available to it, like if you're trying to choose hardware?
Sorry, was that for me? I was too busy typing in the chat.
Yeah, that was for you.
Sorry,
Yeah.
the one time I got. I can't multitask. I'm a single-threaded human.
There's two questions. One was, I guess the second one's probably a little more pertinent for me, is if you're trying to figure out if you're looking at laptops or PC hardware, and you're concerned about the USB controllers and making sure that the camera, you get all the video feeds you need. Is there a way to look that up on like specs of how many controllers it has, or is there things that you can do when you're deciding the hardware to determine if it's suitable enough to have the webcams available?
Got it. Yeah, good question. I will fully admit I'm a bit in the earlier stages of learning about USB architecture in computers and how, as far as the bandwidth they purportedly can handle and actually can handle, and we're getting these ELP cameras from China and stuff, like where nothing on the PC side, on the camera side matches specs, and so you're having to like do all kinds of adjustments along the way, pessimistic adjustments. The best advice I've come across that has seemed relatively reliable is that you essentially, two things. One, the best advice is that you generally don't want to have two high quality, like HD 1080p 60 FPS cameras, more than two on a single USB controller if you want reliability. So if you're trying to run two cams plus a commentator cam plus audio devices, God forbid you have cab mics like we do and stuff, you want to have at least three controllers, and you're also not to forget the capture card itself, which you ideally have more dedicated slot for. You want three controllers, I think, essentially, or four ideally, and to figure out which ports map to which controller, which honestly I've had a really difficult time finding in specs, and you just have to kind of like play around and test them and run command line stuff to figure out where things are mapped. The other thing that I would say is that I didn't realize before really embarking down all of this, which I think is probably obvious to maybe most people in the room, but USB 3 devices, they will, obviously if you plug them into a USB 2 port, they will run at USB 2 speeds. But one thing I didn't realize off the bat is that if you have multiple USB 2 devices in a USB 3 port, say like on a hub or something like a USB 3 hub, they will still use the USB 2 lane. The way the protocol works is that even if you have a USB 3 hub, active powered over active USB extender into a USB-C, even like lightning port, fundamentally, the protocol for USB dictates that any USB 2 devices have a dedicated lane for all of the USB 2 traffic. None of the USB 3 lanes are going to be used. It's like kind of dedicated HOV versus non-HOV. Like there's no way to like get USB 2 devices to use the bandwidth that is available for USB 3 devices and vice versa. So that adds complexity to when you're running these commands to see like which devices are on which controllers. There's like controllers for each lane as well as like the ports themselves. So that's just something like to dig into. But fundamentally, I think you want like 3 to 4 controllers. In short.
So would you say it's probably like a safer bet to go for a little bit lower quality camera just to be on the safe side of like not having just dropped no input devices if you're if you're not going to know until like a day before if your PC is going to have enough USB bandwidth?
I mean, that's a risk. Either it works or it doesn't. Like I've never had it like be flaky. It's just that either you plug that extra device in and now we have an audio mixer plugged in with the commentator camera and the mouse and keyboard, and now it the camera goes out, or the mic doesn't work, or whatever, or like the camera on the actual the gold camera goes out. Like you can only have 2 of the 3 cameras working at any given time. It's like it'll just kind of decide that. It's not like a flaky situation. So if you're like a day before trying to figure stuff out, I think your contingency is not try to get a lower quality camera. I think it's just figure out which thing you're going to cut.
Yeah, I tried
of USB 3. Like if everything is USB 3, will you experience that problem, or is this only when you're mixing 2 and 3, or just 2?
All USB 2 devices use USB 2 lanes. All USB 3 devices use USB 3 lanes, and they're all mutually exclusive. But inside of the like PC, there are a certain number of controllers as well. So you can have like multiple USB ports. You can have like a USB 2 port, USB 2 port, USB 3 port, USB-C port, and like all 4 of those may share the same USB 2 controller, for example, and maybe like 2 of those share one USB 3 controller, and the USB, C Thunderbolt port, shares a controller with one of the USB 3 ports. It varies. Like in my experience, we have 4 different mini PCs, and it's like varied wildly. 3 of them are the same brand. So it's
the
just
problem
like
is very specifically the controller, and it has the version has no bearing on the problem, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the main limitation from my perspective is that cameras are not USB 3. Like all the ELP cameras are USB 2. So it's like we have all this bandwidth that's just like being wasted. We have a USB 3 powered hub. We have a USB 3 powered extender cable, and all of our devices, the audio mixer, the ELP cameras, like everything is USB 2. The only thing that is sometimes USB 3 is a capture card, but most of those are USB 2 as well. So it's like we have. You buy even a mini PC with all these USB 3 and like Thunderbolt ports and stuff. It's like cool. You can plug in a Thunderbolt, adapter, but everything's still running over USB 2 lanes. And so it's like most of the highway is just like empty while everyone's crammed in the HOV lane.
Okay.
Yeah, most of when we stream, most of the time we have 2 cameras on a hub and then capture card separate, because if we try and do all 3, even on a USB 3 hub, that totally should have the bandwidth for it. Just one of them will drop, and then you unplug and plug it back in, and then something else will drop out, stuff like that. So, and we only really do that because half the time we're streaming from my MacBook there that only has 2 USB-C ports. So, limited hardware. And I noticed that it works seemingly better doing the 2 cameras on a USB hub on my MacBook than it does on most Windows computers. Sometimes Windows computers will even have an issue with even that.
I mean, fundamentally, like a USB 3 external hub is a USB 2 hub and a USB 3 hub in one. They're like 2 separate hubs on a circuit level or chip level. But you still find weird eccentricities. I think like you're talking about where just like having them in, you know, different dedicated ports will have better outcomes. That's why, back what I was saying earlier, like label your specific like plugs for everything and have that be reliable, have that not be something you're trying to deal with on production day.
Yeah, cameras are essentially the reason why we've made this, like, I think the community in general has made the streaming choices it has over the last almost decade at this point. Like, just figuring out that, hey, if we plug this camera into a separate USB port from this other camera instead of on one cable, it seems to work better. So, and that was before we knew all the technical details about it.
Another thing just to kind of keep in mind with cameras, if you do want to deviate from the normal one that San Fran has, pioneered, is that most of the time you only see the players in a very small window. So I definitely would never even consider doing like a 4K camera or anything like that, because you're going to shrink them down to a 240 by whatever tiny little square anyways. So it's kind of a waste of bandwidth to try and get super high resolution cameras.
Yeah, the only requirement we had for cameras, other than, like the biggest requirement was that we needed fisheye lenses. We needed to see all the players, because the old cameras for most streams, if you watch circa like 2016, 2017, like all of our cameras were, the normal webcams that you get from Logitech, and you see the three players in the middle and then you don't see Steve on the edge. So
we used to have all of the people who were less comfortable being on stream would play on the edge positions because you couldn't see them at all.
Yeah.
And there were some people that definitely took advantage of that.
Yeah. So
yeah. I mean, so I asked that question just because there's a potential situation where I'll be renting laptops or PCs, and I want to make sure I'm renting the right ones that can handle the USB stuff. So if there's things that I can look at ahead of time without having physical access to them, that was the kind of information I was trying to extrapolate, which I think I got as much as I can for now on that.
I feel like I don't actually know this to be true. But I do have a feeling, based on the experiences I've had with streaming, that laptops that have ports on either side have separate controllers per side.
Per side, yeah. That would make sense.
Yeah. Again, I don't know. I don't know for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I forget the commands offhand, but it's like on Linux, it's like LSUSB is the most basic command where you can see which controllers and map to which ports, but it's only for devices that are plugged in. So, and it's divvied up based on like USB 2 versus 3 and stuff. So there's a bit of like parsing of that. There's a more verbose utility on Linux. I'm not sure, about Windows and Mac. I think probably the same thing for Mac, but for Windows, I'm not sure. But fundamentally, like I've had not great luck looking up specs for PCs about the USB controller configurations.
Also, I will say, I think that most laptops are gonna have at least 2 lanes for everything like that. And you'll be able to make most things work. It's just figuring out which ports they'll go into in the right order, right? Like most laptops will all have enough bandwidth. It's just on which ones. And you might have to just kind of trial and error on day of setup in order to figure out, where everything is at. I haven't run into any situations where the computer just straight up didn't have enough. Regardless of what ports we used.
I have run into this situation once years ago, which is which is why I'm cautious of it to this day.
Oh, speaking of these cameras, the ELP camera, you mentioned a refresh rate issue earlier. Is that specific to Linux? Because we have a couple new ELP cameras, and I've noticed that they have like a pretty strong flickering that happen. Or not, it's not really a flickering. It's kind of like it's like a rolling shutter effect. Looks like, you know, like when you try to record a fluorescent light.
Yeah,
Have you
so
guys
I've seen that. I haven't worked with the cameras enough on Unix or Windows to know how prevalent the issue is on those, but certainly on our Linux machines, I've seen that kind of. I've seen both the aggressive flickering as well as this like top-down slow strobing thing that will sometimes happen. For the flickering, and I believe also the subtle strobing, they are certainly the former is related to having the auto exposure setting on as opposed to a manual exposure. In my experience, so you can set a manual exposure. The issue with manual exposure, in particular for the like CMOS 5 megapixel cameras, where you pretty much need to have cab lighting, you know, like these or whatever. For those, I have found that during the day, you know, as like daylight changes, if you're in an environment where like ambient light is changing over time, you know, manual will be better in any given moment, but you know, a half hour later, it can change drastically, and people can, you know, be like blacked out or like washed out. And
there's no time plug in arcade, so that'll be no problem.
Yeah, so I mean, auto should be good. I know some of the OBS settings are different for different operating systems, but there's also in at least Linux, which generally has fewer options. There's an exposure priority frame rate, variable frame rate checkbox that also will kind of tweak things a bit. And then I guess thirdly, there's a backlight compensation setting that at least on Linux goes from like 0 to 2, and that can overall, like if you have a really bright windows and stuff in the background, you know, like bright sunlight out of the windows, you can crank it up, and then it will kind of overexpose the background but make the foreground more reasonable. In general, I find like noon very difficult at the detour for at least some of the cab positions. Others are totally fine. Philo here is like, I don't have to do anything. It's really nice, even when it's really bright outside. So it's all very specific, I think, to your environment. But yeah, that flickering, I think, is when when you have an automatic setting on auto exposure and auto white balance, like those things, it can get right on the cusp of like a decision, and I think it goes back and forth and gets caught.
Cool.
On the questions of lighting, I know that like the magnetic lights that people have been putting on the cabs, we have some, but if we play for a really long time, the batteries die. I know people have been plugging them in. Is there like a good way to do that, or just a USB hub and a powered USB hub and double side tape it to the back of the cab, or what?
I can speak to that briefly. So I found this one USB 2 to 4-way like spider cable that's like 6 feet. That's what we use. So it goes to the back of the cab, and just you need like a really small extension cable. It won't reach all the way inside of the cab to the power supply, which would have been nice, the power strip, but it gets pretty close. It's a 1 USB to 4 split, and then it's a female A on the 4 split, and then you for the lights we got, at least they have like a 2-foot USB-C to USB-A male cable, and so we just have that single cable going to. We got like little tiny wall warts, like kind of iPad style, you know, wall warts that we just plug into some power source in the back. and that one power source splits to all the lights. If the lights are all dead, it will not be able to power all of them. But if they are charged, and you can charge all of them at the same time, if they're charged, and you just like leave them plugged in when you go to turn them on, they last forever. We've never had an issue. Like right now, all 4 of them are green on this one at Philo, but at Detour, we take them down every Monday, but we've never had issues with them as long as they're plugged in. But it's nice to have a single cable in the back instead of a bunch of monkey business. We call it a spider cable. I can say it's in our parts list that I think Felix has a link to.
Yeah.
Kevin, I'm gonna invite you to speak 1 second.
I will say it is just shorter than the entire length of the cab, so you do have to do some taping, sadly.
Real quick, about the lighting for people who have the EOP cams and maybe can't do a bunch of like additional lighting. What I do at Cidercade is I just use a different like resolution in the in OBS that makes it like really fisheyed, but it picks up light a lot better. And then I just use a filter to crop out all the extra around the players, basically. Because if I use like 1080, 720, whatever on the OBS properties, the players are just like blacked out, kind of like the little. Which Pokemon is this that Richard noticed at Free Play this past weekend?
We use 800, 600 based on Toshi's like discovery for the last Emerald City. He like found out that 800, 600 was the widest angle that you could get, and that's when we started using that. But we still have the kind of exposure issues on the 5 megapixels, the 1.3 or 2 megapixels, which I'm actually running from the one you're seeing me right now. This is not the 5. That's why I'm at Stripes right now, and I'm like right on the edge. The 5 megapixel CMOS would have a better view, but this is also at 800, 600 right now. But for some reason, the 5 megapixel ones have an even slightly wider, even though they all say they're 170. Go ahead.
Oh, I have the 5s. That's probably why.
Are you going? Okay, so yeah, I mean, for Philo right here, we're just using the old ones, but for we have like 4, I think, right now of the 5s, and we use those at both of the Detour cabs right now. Are you using 800 by 600 resolution? Is that the Toshi had figured out, or a different one?
No, I'm using like wider, like 1366 by something.
Interesting, cause we should tap. Can you start a thread on that on production chat? Because Toshi had like tested a bunch of these and found the 800, 600, even though it's not like wide, because it's actually square. It allows you to actually capture more, but at lower resolution. I just like want to drive this to resolution. Like what's the widest we can get? Because my understanding was the 800, 600 on these was the best we could get. I would love to like try to figure that out.
Yeah.
It's not that.
Yeah, no problem. I can start it, and then tomorrow I'm actually gonna be at Cidercade with the cams and everything, so I can even test it there. Yeah. No, actually, yeah, it's 2048 by 1536 is what I use, and then I just crop from there. There's been like 1 or 2 times that it'll get like a little dark, and I'll just put my hand to the camera and it'll adjust itself, and then everything's good again. So
I wanted to mention one thing about the flickering and that rolling artifact thing that was brought up. And this has been a really long time since I've done this. It's like 2016 or 17 or something. I remember in OBS and maybe in some other driver setting or something, the refresh rate was for the camera was set to, or the power was set to 50. And I think just because in Europe, like the power and video defaults to 50 hertz, that there may be some kind of setting where you're getting like a 50 versus 60 mismatch that might be causing that. I don't remember where it was. It was so long ago, but something to maybe investigate to
Power
fix
line.
that flicker thing.
Yeah, it's the power line frequency.
Yeah.
Yeah, do not set it to
Is that-
50.
Is that an OBS?
Yeah, that's an OBS.
Yeah.
Yep,
But you might just want to check that setting.
for sure. Really quick, here's the snake cable that I was talking, or spider cable I was talking about. So we have like a little, just like a little plug there. This is USB A that male that goes to a 4-way splitter. USB female, USB A female. There's 4 of these, and then these are the cables that come with our lights that go USB A male to USB C male. And like Felix said, it like barely doesn't get all the way to the cab power strip, but it's close. So if you have, I think we're like trying to move toward a model where we have a power strip like alpha locked onto the back of the cab, like kind of chest level, where you can plug a bunch of things in, like the HiveMind boxes, other things that like have pretty short cables, 4-foot runs and stuff like that, about chest level. Haven't quite nailed that down, but
With that said, are you running 2 questions? Are you running 2 lights per cab?
yeah.
And then talking about putting stuff on the back, are you just leaving the back panel off? Or are you leaving the top or the bottom one off if you're running like HiveMind power and stuff like that?
The back panel.
Or are you like wrapping it around the edge of the cab?
We wrap it over the top.
Gotcha.
Yeah. For the lights, they go over top. Yeah. Everything else
Yeah.
we try to run down underneath. Though since we're at Philo and no one, it's at work, so I have the PC out just for accessibility. But generally, we run everything low, and then just the lights, we will run the cables over top.
Gotcha. So you're not running anything through the cab.
The only thing that I ever run through the cab,
The cameras and
cameras.
these
And-
mics. We have like these mics here. These
Yeah.
cab mics.
yeah,
That are
and
pretty good.
yeah, and commentator and HiveMind boxes, since that is cable limited. Not
Yeah.
necessarily because I can't buy new cables, but because I'm too lazy to buy new cables. One thing I will, yeah, and I usually just keep the back panels off because maintenance is a lot easier, and for no one's looking in the back anyway. And it's a really convenient storage space for literally all the parts. So
I feel like half the cabs that I see, the back panel is permanently off. So
yeah. The bar doesn't the bars usually don't care that much because it's easier for them, and also no one can reach the coin slot there anyway. So since the financial stuff is all protected
right.
behind the front panels. So
Yeah. We did lose a D20 key for Jeff and Elise's cab. So we unscrewed the locks. The back.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I definitely mentioned this in the presentation, but just want to throw this out there for those who are doing this for the first time. Have a soldering kit just in case.
Yeah, I have a little USB-C TS100 soldering iron that I love very much.
That's good. Anything is good enough. Just as long as you have something to repair a ripped input, because that happens more often than it should.
Yeah.
I've got a little butane powered soldering iron. Just put some lighter fluid in it and you click it.
Get into all the tight spaces.
Yeah.
But we have had we have had success, and I don't recommend this. If you do rip an input and don't have a soldering iron, you can take a bare input and just hook it up to the switch directly.
I've built MAME cabs before. I know how the jank goes.
All right.
And you can strip
8.
wire with your teeth if you're good.
Oh God.
That's how I strip cables.
Sanitary.
Yeah. I've licked
All right,
everything in the cab.
Yeah, everybody know that. Brian's
All right.
licked the inside of every cab before
All
it
right.
goes out.
It is 8 p.m. now. And yeah, it's been a long set of presentations.
Thank
I've
you
linked
greatly.
the presentation with all of our stuff inside the chat, so feel free to take it, and I'll give everyone edit access, I guess. Yeah, let's close it here. If anyone has any more questions, we can direct it to production chat, and hopefully in a couple months we can have this again with someone else presenting. Sound good?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for putting this all together.
Cool.
Thanks, Felix.
Yep.
Thanks, Felix, and thank you all. This was really cool.
Yep.
Look forward to more chats moving forward.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. We'll continue communication through production. So see you all later. Bye.